It started during the worst snowstorm of the year, thick, relentless flakes pouring from the sky, blinding white swallowing everything outside. The power had flickered twice before finally going out, leaving the cabin in dim, flickering candlelight. I wasn't scared, not yet. The place was remote, sure, but it was supposed to be peaceful. A week away from the chaos of work, the noise of city life. Just me, some books, and the sound of the wind pushing against the wooden walls. On the second day, after the snow had piled high against the door, I noticed it. A window in the guest room that hadn't been there before. It was strange, because I remembered unpacking in that room. There were only two windows, one overlooking the woods, the other near the bed. But now, a third one had appeared on the far wall, above the writing desk. I stood there, blinking at it in disbelief, trying to rationalize. Maybe I hadn't noticed it. Maybe I was tired. The glass was frosted, obscuring anything beyond it. Still, something felt wrong. The frame was different, older than the others. Warped wood with iron corners and streaks of black across the panes like veins. I pressed my hand to it and felt a sharp, unnatural chill, colder than the rest of it. Something deep inside me clenched. That night, I tried to sleep, but the wind was louder than usual. It howled in strange patterns, like voices carried across the storm. I kept thinking about the window. At 2:14 a.m., I woke up abruptly. I don't remember dreaming. I don't remember hearing anything. I just knew, instinctively, something had changed. I went into the guest room, compelled by a feeling I couldn't explain. The candlelight flickered violently as I stepped in. I looked at the new window and froze. There was a figure behind it. Not a shadow, not a tree's move. No, a human-shaped form, motionless, staring in. I couldn't see the face, only a silhouette, but I knew it was watching. I took a step back, then another, my skin crawling. I turned to run, but something made me stop. The figure raised its hand and mimicked mine. The next morning, the figure was gone, and I convinced myself it was a hallucination. Stress, isolation, maybe even cabin fever. But the unease didn't leave me. That day, I tried to open the window. It wouldn't budge. I checked the outside wall. There was nothing there, just a smooth, snow-covered exterior with no sign of a window from the outside. That night, it came back. This time, there were two figures. I stayed frozen in place, watching. They stood silently behind the glass, occasionally tilting their heads in opposite directions. One of them began tapping its finger against the window, softly at first, then harder. The tapping didn't stop for hours. I barely slept. Over the next few days, the figures multiplied. Each night another would appear. They didn't move much, but they watched, always watching. Some looked like strangers, some disturbingly familiar. One had my mother's outline. Another resembled my childhood friend. On the fifth night, I saw my own face in the glass, pale, gaunt, eyes sunken and wide. I tried to leave. I bundled myself in layers, forced open the frozen front door, and trudged through waist-deep snow toward the truck. But the tires were frozen in place, the engine unresponsive. I tried walking, only to circle back to the cabin again, no matter which direction I took. The cabin had become a trap. The window grew darker each day, the glass streaked with shadows, moving behind the figure. Sometimes, they whispered, but I couldn't understand the words. Other times, I'd find the whispering coming from inside the room, behind me. I stopped sleeping altogether. One morning, I found writing on the window. A message etched into the frost from the other side. "Let us in!" I screamed, through books, furniture, anything I could find at the glass. But it didn't crack. I even tried covering the window with blankets and duct tape, but the figures just appeared behind the fabric, pressing their faces against it until I tore it down in horror. I tried burning the window frame. The flame didn't even blacken the wood. Instead, the fire spread across the floor in a fast, unnatural arc. I barely contained it. Then, I started hearing them when I wasn't even in the room. Footsteps, breathing, my name whispered behind walls. One night, I awoke to find my bedroom door open and a trail of frost leading from the hallway to the foot of my bed. I knew I was losing my mind, but I also knew it was real. Then came the worst night. I woke to silence. No wind, no sound at all. A stillness so deep it felt like the world had stopped. I lit a candle and walked to the guest room one last time. The window was gone. I stood there blinking at the bare wall. Then I saw the reflection. The mirror across the room showed the window still there, with all the figures behind. But in the room itself, there was only a wall. I stared at my own reflection, horrified, and then I saw it. My reflection wasn't moving in sync. It smiled at me. It raised its hand and waved while I stood frozen. And then I wasn't in my body anymore. I don't know how to describe what happened next. The room blurred, like a veil being pulled. I felt cold, an overwhelming cold that seeped into my bones And then I was on the other side of the glass, staring out at the room from behind the window, unable to scream, unable to move. Now, I'm one of them. I don't know who or what is wearing my face, walking in my body. But if you ever find yourself in a cabin during a snowstorm and you notice a window that shouldn't be there, don't look at it. Don't wave. Don't respond, because the thing on the other side might look like you, and it's waiting for an invitation. It was supposed to be a peaceful getaway. After years of nonstop city life and the chaos of my job, I needed solitude. So when my cousin offered me his family's old lodge deep in the mountains for a week, I jumped at the chance. No cell service, no neighbors, no distraction, just snow, silence, and time to breathe. The lodge was ancient, wooden beams creaking under the weight of time, tall windows looking out into the snowy forest, and a fireplace that crackled louder than it should. I arrived just before the snowstorm. The forecast said it would be heavy, but I didn't expect it to feel so suffocating. By the second night, the snow had trapped me inside. It was beautiful at first, the kind of quiet that wraps around you like a blanket. But then, strange things began to happen. Small things at first, subtle, easy to dismiss. A chair slightly out of place, a door that I knew I'd shut swinging open in the night, the sound of footsteps on the second floor when I was downstairs. I told myself it was just an old house creaking under the weight of snow and wind. But then, on the third night, I saw the footprints. They were by the back door, pressed deep into the snow, bare footprints, human-sized, and leading directly to the door, but not away from it. I stood frozen for minutes, staring through the window, trying to process what I was seeing. Someone had walked to the door barefoot in sub-zero temperatures and never left. I locked every window and door after that. The next morning, the footprints were gone, completely erased, as if they'd never been there. But a new set appeared that night, this time on the front porch, just outside the living room window. Again, barefoot. Again, no path leading away. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in front of the fireplace with a kitchen knife in hand, waiting. The house creaked louder than usual. The wind didn't sound like wind anymore. It sounded like someone whispering just outside the walls. And then, around 3 a.m., I heard it. Slow, deliberate knocking on the front door. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The knocking continued for nearly 10 minutes. When it finally stopped, I gathered the courage to peek through the peephole. There was no one there. But in the snow, just beyond the porch steps, I saw something I still can't explain. Hundreds of footprints, all leading toward the house, all barefoot, all human. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But where would I go? The snow was chest high. I was trapped. That night, I pushed furniture against the doors. I boarded the windows. I built a fire so big it lit the entire living room, trying to keep whatever was out there at bay. And then I heard it, inside the house. Footsteps, slow, dragging, shuffling footsteps on the second floor. But I was alone. I grabbed the knife again and crept upstairs, one step at a time. The hallway was freezing. I could see my breath in the air. The floorboards were coated in frost. That's when I noticed something written on the hallway mirror. It hadn't been there before. "You brought it with you." I backed away, heart pounding. Something was wrong. Deeply, horribly wrong. The air was too still, too cold. The walls groaned like something was pressing against them from the outside. I fled back downstairs, but when I reached the living room, I froze. The furniture I'd pushed against the doors was moved. The front door stood wide open. Snow blew in across the floor, and standing in the middle of the room was a figure, tall, emaciated, with pale skin stretched too tightly over its bones. Its eyes were hollow, its mouth wide open as if frozen mid-scream. It didn't move. It just stood there. And then, without a sound, it turned and walked toward the fireplace. As it did, the flames dimmed until they were nearly out. I ran to the bedroom and locked myself inside. All night I heard scratching at the walls, the sounds of something pacing outside the room, whispers just behind the door. When morning came, I cautiously stepped out. The house was empty again. No footprints, no creature. The fire was dead cold, but something was different. The house didn't feel empty. That night I noticed a figure in the corner of the room. I thought it was a trick of the light, a shadow, but it's still there, watching, always watching. Every time I turn off the lights, it gets closer. I don't know what I brought with me. Maybe something from the city. Maybe something from my past. Maybe the house wasn't haunted. Maybe I was. All I know is this. It won't let me leave. The snowstorms finally stopped. The roads are clear. But every time I open the door to leave, I find myself back inside, standing in the same room, with the same cold air, with the same figure watching from the corner. If anyone finds this, burn the lodge. Burn it to the ground. And whatever you do, never follow barefoot footprints in snow. I've never been the superstitious type. I'm the kind of guy who rationalizes every creak in the floorboards, every flicker of the light. Ghost stories were just that, stories. So when I agreed to house sit for my friend Mason at his newly bought cabin upstate during a forecasted snowstorm, I didn't hesitate. He warned me it was isolated, quiet, a bit old, but that was perfect for me. I needed space to finish writing my thesis anyway. The first day was uneventful, peaceful even. The cabin sat nestled against a thick line of trees, surrounded by nothing but snow-covered forest and silence. I spent the evening curled up by the fire, reading, sipping coffee, letting my thoughts settle. But the second night changed everything. It started with the mirror. There was an antique mirror hanging in the hallway between the bedroom and bathroom, large, oval, with a decorative black frame. I passed it a dozen times without thinking twice. But that night, when I walked by it on my way to the bathroom, I noticed something strange. My reflection wasn't moving right. I stopped, staring at it. At first, I thought I was just tired, but I blinked. My reflection didn't. I tilted my head slightly. Nothing. It stared back at me, perfectly still, eyes wide open. Then it smiled. A slow, unnaturally wide grin crept across its face, while mine remained frozen in confusion. I backed away in shock, my heart thudding, and in that moment, the light in the hallway flickered violently, then went out completely. When I looked again, the reflection was gone. Just an empty hallway in the mirror. I didn't sleep that. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was a hallucination, maybe stress, maybe exhaustion. I stayed away from the mirror and focused on my work. But around noon, I noticed something else. Footprints, wet ones, appearing on the wooden floor, trailing from the mirror toward the kitchen. I followed them with shaking steps. They stopped at the kitchen doorway, but no one was there. I checked every door, every window, all locked. I even checked the mirror again, just my reflection this time. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. That night, I heard whispering, not just in the wind or my head, actual voices, soft, raspy, unintelligible whispers that seemed to echo through the walls. It sounded like dozens of people murmuring at once, all around me. Sometimes they laughed, soft, breathy giggles that made my skin crawl. I couldn't tell where they were coming from. Then, the mirror started changing. Every time I walked by it, it showed something different. Once it showed me standing in the snow outside the cabin, even though I was inside. Another time, it showed me asleep in bed, but someone else standing over me. That night, I turned the mirror to face the wall. I thought it would help. I was wrong. The moment I did, something pounded against it from the other side. 3 heavy thuds, loud enough to rattle the glass. I didn't look. I couldn't. Then came the scratching, all night long, from behind the mirror, slow, deliberate scratching, like nails dragging across wood. I barely slept, covering my ears, praying for daylight. When I woke up the next morning, the mirror was facing out again. I didn't move it. Didn't. The whispers grew louder. I began seeing things in the corners of my eyes. Shapes, shadows, pale faces staring at me from the windows, only to vanish when I turned. The cabin didn't feel empty anymore. It felt crowded, like the walls were closing in, like something was watching me every second. On the 5th night, I saw her. I was in the living room, trying to distract myself with TV, when the screen went black, and in the reflection of the screen, I saw her standing behind me. A woman, tall, soaking wet, with long black hair that hung like ropes. Her skin a pale, decayed gray. Her eyes were completely white, and her mouth was twisted into that same unnatural grin I'd seen in the mirror. I spun around, nothing. But when I looked at the screen again, she was closer. That night, the whispers turned into screams. I heard them from every room, like dozens of people trapped in the walls, crying, begging, shrieking. The cabin shook. The lights flickered nonstop. The mirror vibrated on the wall like something was trying to push through. I tried to leave. I packed my bag, threw on my coat, and ran for the door. But when I stepped outside, the world was gone. No forest, no snow, just an endless void of black. I turned back inside in a panic, and the cabin was different. Rotten wood, mold-covered walls, broken furniture. The fireplace was just a hole in the wall, blackened and crumbling. And the mirror? It was glowing. I saw dozens of faces behind the glass now, trapped, screaming silently, their palms pressed against the other side. Some looked decayed, others fresh, but all had the same hollow white eyes and twisted grins. I saw myself among them. I don't know how long I've been here. Time feels different. The clocks don't move. My reflection isn't mine anymore. It walks when I don't. It smiles when I'm terrified. Sometimes it bangs on the glass, begging me to let it in, and the whispers, they've stopped, replaced by a voice, her voice. It echoes from the mirror now, soft and cold. One reflection in, One soul out. I'm not sure who I am. Sometimes I catch glimpses of myself in the mirror, but I'm on the wrong side. If someone finds this, don't stay in this. Don't trust the mirrors. Don't listen to the whisper. And never, ever smile back. It was supposed to be a short, peaceful visit, just a weekend trip to my late grandfather's cabin in the mountains to check on the place after a series of heavy snowstorms. My mother asked me to do it since no one had been up there in years. The roads had just been cleared, and I figured I'd go, spend a night, and head back down before another storm rolled. The cabin sat near the edge of a forest, nestled between tall trees that looked older than time itself. It was rustic, creaky, and covered in a thick layer of snow, but something about it still felt familiar. I had vague memories of visiting as a child, though they were hazy. Images of sitting by the fireplace, my grandfather humming softly while snow drifted outside. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt a shift in the air. It wasn't just the cold. It was heavy, like the place was holding its breath. There was no power, of course. I lit a few lanterns, checked the fireplace, and unpacked my things. The cabin was dusty but untouched. Everything seemed the way it had always been, except for one thing. There was a door in the hallway I didn't remember. It was small, barely the width of my shoulders, tucked between two coat hooks near the back of the cabin. The doorknob was old brass, rusted and slightly bent. I tried it, it was locked. No big deal, I thought. Probably just a crawl space, old storage. But the longer I stared at that door, the more it unsettled me. That night, I couldn't sleep. There was a noise, soft tapping, coming from somewhere deep in the cabin. It wasn't rhythmic or steady, just scattered, like someone drumming their fingers on wood. I thought maybe it was snow falling from the roof or an animal on the porch, but the tapping kept moving. It started in the kitchen, then shifted to the living room, then the hallway, until finally it was right outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, listening. The tapping stopped. Then came the whisper. It was faint, like a voice carried by the wind, but it was inside the cabin. Words I couldn't make out. A low, wet voice, repeating something over and over. I grabbed a flashlight and threw open the door, heart pounding. There was nothing in the hallway, but that small door, it was open. Just a crack. I know I didn't. I approached slowly and pushed it open. Behind it wasn't a crawl space. It was a narrow staircase, spiraling downward into complete darkness. A hidden basement I never knew existed. I felt a rush of cold air, rising from the depths, thick and foul, like rotting earth. I should have left right then, but something compelled me to go down. I took the lantern and descended slowly, each step groaning beneath my feet. The staircase twisted in unnatural angles, and I swear it went farther than it should have, far deeper than the cabin's foundation. When I reached the bottom, I found a stone room, damp, ancient, and covered in carvings etched into the walls, symbols I couldn't understand. In the center of the room stood a tall, black wooden chair, surrounded by broken candles and piles of ashes. The air was heavy, oppressive. My breath fogged in front of me, and the silence was so complete, it rang in my ears. Then I saw the writing on the far wall, scrawled in black, jagged letters, "Do not wake him." I didn't understand what it meant until I saw the footprints, bare, wet footprints, leading from the chair toward the stairs. I turned to run, but the staircase was gone. Not hidden, not collapsed, gone. There was only a smooth wall where I'd come in. I screamed, banged, clawed at the stone, but it didn't budge. The lantern flickered wildly, then went out completely. I was trapped in the dark, surrounded by silence. And then I heard it, the chair creaking. Something was moving behind me, breathing, heavy, animal-like breathing. I turned, but there was nothing there, just the sound of slow, dragging footsteps circling. I pressed myself into a corner, whispering prayers, trying not to lose my mind. I don't remember how I got out. I woke up on the floor of the cabin, covered in frost. The lantern shattered beside me. The door was sealed shut again, like it had never opened. But the footprints were still there, muddy, wet, leading out of the hallway and into the living room. That night I tried to leave. I packed my things, rushed to the truck, and found deep scratches along the driver's side door. 5 long, jagged marks, like claws. The air was bitter cold, and the snow had started falling, but I drove as fast as I could down the mountain. I haven't told my family what happened. They wouldn't believe me anyway, but I've had dreams every night since, of that chair, that room, and something standing in the shadows, just out of reach, watching, whispering my name. I don't know what I found beneath that cabin. I don't know what I woke up, but I know it followed. It started with a snowstorm and an empty road. I was driving back from a work retreat in the mountains, trying to beat the storm that the weather reports had been warning about for days. My colleagues had all left early that morning, but I stayed behind to finish some paperwork in peace. By the time I packed up and got on the road, the sky had already turned a dull, oppressive gray. Snow had started falling, soft at first, then faster, heavier, like someone shaking the clouds loose all at once. I wasn't worried at first. I'd driven in snow before. I had chains on the tires, a full tank, even an emergency kit in the back seat. I was cautious, kept my speed low, focused on the road, but somewhere along that winding mountain highway, things began to change. The trees on either side grew denser, darker. The road seemed unfamiliar, even though it was the same route I'd taken just days earlier. The snow thickened until it was nearly impossible to see past the windshield. Every turn looked the same. Tight curves, tall pines, endless white. Then, my GPS lost signal. No problem, I told myself. I knew the way. I kept driving, watching for road signs, except none ever appeared. No mile markers, no exit signs, just forest and snow. That's when I saw the figure, standing at the edge of the road, barely visible through the snowfall. It looked like a person, a woman, I thought, wrapped in a long coat, her face hidden under a scarf and hood. I slowed down and rolled my window down a little, shouting, "Are you all right? Do you need help?" She didn't respond. She just stood there, staring at the car. Something about her was off. Her posture was stiff, rigid, almost unnatural, and her hands, they hung oddly at her sides, twisted at strange angles, like her joints bent the wrong way. I felt a strange pressure in my chest, like my body was telling me to leave right now. I pressed the gas. I didn't look back, didn't stop, until she disappeared behind me in the white haze. But a few miles later, I swear to you, I saw her again. Same figure, same coat, same scarf, standing in the middle of the road ahead. I slammed the brakes, skidding slightly on the icy pavement. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, heart racing. She was gone. Just gone. I kept going, feeling something between confusion and dread curling in my gut. I started noticing other things, strange things. The snowflakes outside weren't falling naturally. They drifted sideways in sharp angles, like they were being pulled by something invisible. The trees looked warped and unnatural, some bending in toward the road like they were reaching for. Then, the headlights caught something that made my blood freeze. Footprints, bare human footprints in the snow, right down the center of the road. No shoes, no boots, just naked feet, leading ahead of me. They looked fresh, impossible, but fresh. I followed them for a while, too scared to stop, too curious to turn back. And then I saw her again. This time she was closer, just a few feet away on the shoulder. She turned her head slowly toward me, and I finally saw her face, or rather, what was left of it. Her skin was pale and cracked, stretched tight over bone. Her mouth was open impossibly wide, jaw dislocated, revealing rows of black, jagged teeth that looked like shattered glass. Her eyes were hollow, sunken pits leaking thick, dark liquid that steamed in the cold. I panicked and swerved around her. As I passed, I heard a noise, like ice cracking beneath pressure. And when I glanced in the rearview mirror, she was gone again. But now, she was in the mirror. Not outside, not behind the car, inside the back seat. I spun around, but the back was empty. Nothing there, just my own breathing echoing too loudly in my ears. I told myself I was losing it, that the isolation, the snow, the stress was making me hallucinate. Then I saw the frost forming on the inside of the windows, fingerprints, smears, as if something had been crawling along the glass from the inside. I couldn't take it anymore. I floored the gas, hoping to find anything, a gas station, a town, a sign of life. But the road never changed. It just kept stretching endlessly forward, swallowed by snow and trees that looked more like twisted shadows than plants. Eventually, I saw lights in the distance, a house. Relief flooded me. I turned down the small path that led to it, tires crunching through thick snow. The house was old, crooked, half buried under ice. I knocked on the door until my knuckles bled, begging for help. No one answered. I pushed the door open. It wasn't locked. The inside was empty, dusty, silent, and cold. Colder than anything I'd ever felt. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, only to hear footsteps upstairs, slow, deliberate. I called out, "Hello?" No answer, just the sound of something descending the staircase. I ran. I jumped back in my car, tore out of there, driving blindly into the snow. I didn't stop until I reached a ranger station at the foot of the mountain, hours later. The ranger found me in the car, shivering and half delirious. I told him everything. He didn't say much, just looked at me with a strange expression and said, "You're lucky. Most don't come back from that stretch of road." "What do you mean?" I asked. He sighed. "There's a stretch of highway up there that doesn't show on any map. Locals call it Dead Woman's Curve. Folks say a woman died there decades ago in a car crash during a snowstorm, and now she wanders the road, luring drivers off course. Some say she's just lost. Others say she wants company in the cold." I didn't believe him, but when I got home, I found something under my passenger, a scarf, old, soaked in something dark, not mine. And I still see her sometimes, in reflections, in the frost on the window, in the dead silence of a snowstorm. It was supposed to be a weekend getaway, a peaceful escape from the city, to a remote cabin buried deep in the woods, surrounded by thick snowdrifts and silence. My girlfriend Emma had found the listing online, and the photos were beautiful. Rustic wooden walls, a stone fireplace, snow-covered trees stretching for miles in every direction. We arrived just before dusk. The sun dipped low behind the pines, casting long shadows across the powdery snow. The road leading to the cabin was barely navigable, a narrow trail flanked by trees that leaned in as if whispering to each other. I remember thinking it felt oddly claustrophobic, even outside, but the cabin itself was exactly as described, cozy, warm, and eerily quiet, too quiet. That first night, we sat by the fire, drinking wine, watching the snow fall outside the large living room window. Everything was perfect until we heard the knock. It was faint at first, barely audible over the crackling fire, but definitely a knock. 3 soft taps on the back door. We both turned to look at each other, confused. Did someone follow us here? Emma whispered. I doubt it, I said, getting up to check. There's no other cabin for miles. I opened the back door slowly, bracing against the cold wind that rushed in. No one was there, just a fresh layer of untouched snow and the tree line in the distance. I stepped out, scanning the area. Nothing. Not a footprint in sight. I came back in, trying to laugh it off. Maybe the wind or a branch, I said. Emma didn't seem convinced. That night I had trouble sleeping. Not because of fear, at least not at first, but because I kept hearing strange noises outside. The soft crunch of footsteps, a slow dragging sound like something being pulled through the snow, and occasionally that knock again. Always 3 taps, always from a different side of the cabin. I didn't wake Emma. I told myself it was animals, wind, snow shifting from the roof. But the next morning I went outside to check, and that's when I saw the footprint, dozens of them surrounding the cabin. They weren't animal prints, they were unmistakably human, bare feet in the snow, circling the entire building. Some came right up to the windows. Others disappeared into the forest. No other tracks, no shoes, just long, winding trails of frostbitten footprints. Emma came out a moment later, her face going pale when she saw them. Someone was watching us, she said. We tried to call the owner of the cabin. No signal. We tried calling anyone, emergency services, friends, family, but there was no cell reception. Nothing worked. That day we stayed indoors, barely speaking. Every creak of the wooden floor, every groan of the wind outside felt amplified. We sat in silence, waiting for night to fall again, dreading it. And when it did, the knocking. 3 slow taps, then again, and again. From different walls, different doors, different windows. We turned off all the lights and sat in the dark, barely breathing. At some point, Emma screamed. She said she saw a face in the kitchen window, pale, expressionless, eyes too wide and black, mouth open in a silent scream. I ran to look, but it was already gone. I checked the snow outside. More footprints. Closer now. Pressed right against the glass. We decided we had to leave, storm or not. We packed our bags in a record time and got in the car. I backed out of the narrow driveway, tires spinning in the thick snow, headlights cutting through the falling flurries. And then we saw her, standing in the middle of the road. A woman, completely naked, skin covered in frost, hair long and wet like she'd just stepped out of an icy lake. Her arms hung limply by her sides, and her head was tilted far too much to the left, almost unnaturally. Her eyes were blank. Her mouth was still open in that same silent scream. I swerved to avoid hitting her, and the car slid off the road into a snowbank. When we looked back, she was gone. We sat there for what felt like hours, afraid to move, the engine idling while snow piled up on the windshield. Finally, we gathered our courage and got out to push the car free, but the snow was too thick. We had no choice but to hike back to the cabin. But when we returned, it wasn't the same cabin. The door was different. The porch was crooked. The windows were boarded. The chimney was crumbled. And inside, it was completely gutted, empty, abandoned, as if it hadn't been occupied for years. We couldn't speak. We just stared in disbelief. And then we saw the fireplace. There were carvings on the stone, names, dozens of them, etched into the rock like a memorial. Emma's hand reached out to trace them. Her name was there. So was mine. And below our name, a fresh line had been added. A new name scratched into the stone. The Hollow Woman. Neither of us remembers passing out, but when we woke up, it was morning. We were in our car, parked on the main highway. A passing driver had stopped to check on us. Said he found us unconscious with the engine running, doors open, snow all over. We never spoke about what happened. We never told anyone. We never went back. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, when the wind howls through the trees and frost creeps across the glass, I swear I still hear her knocking. 3 soft taps, always 3. It was supposed to be just another routine shift, I'd been working as a winter road maintenance supervisor for the last 3 years, monitoring highway conditions, dispatching plow trucks, and doing the occasional patrol drive to check for stranded vehicles during heavy snowstorms. Most nights were uneventful, a blur of radio chatter, coffee, and quiet roads, blanketed in white. But that night, God, that night was different. The blizzard had rolled in fast, stronger than forecasted. Visibility dropped to nearly zero. The roads were empty, lifeless, and swallowed by white. It was past midnight when my radio crackled with a distress call, barely audible through the static. All units, stranded vehicle, mile marker 131, passenger, unresponsive. The voice cut out before the location could be repeated. I tried to respond, but got nothing but static. My gut tightened. Mile marker 131 was in one of the most remote stretches of Highway 17, near a stretch locals ominously called the Hollow Turn. Because trees surrounded it so tightly, it always felt like the forest was closing in on you. I drove out alone, headlights piercing through the thick snow, windshield wipers fighting a losing battle. It took over an hour to reach the location. When I did, I spotted the car, an old blue sedan half buried in a snowdrift on the shoulder. Its hazard lights were blinking, casting an eerie amber glow on the snow. I pulled up behind it and got out, immediately hit by the freezing wind. I walked to the driver's side and knocked on the fogged-up window. No response. I tried the door. Unlocked. Inside, a woman sat in the driver's seat, motionless. She looked about 30, her skin pale, eyes wide open, staring straight ahead. Her lips were slightly parted, like she had been about to speak, but never got the chance. Frost had already started to creep across her face. I shook her shoulder, nothing. Cold as ice. But then, her eyes shifted, just slightly, just enough to lock with mine. And for a split second, I swear, she smiled. I stumbled back, startled, breath fogging up the air in front of me. But when I looked again, her eyes were glassy and still. No movement, no smile. She was dead. I called it in, though the signal was weak. Dispatch said they hadn't sent the original distress call. No record of it. No units dispatched. No one else on that frequency that night. That's when I noticed something else. The car's dashboard was old, dusty, cracked, like it hadn't been used in years. The inspection sticker on the windshield was dated 2003. It didn't make sense. This car shouldn't have been on the road. It shouldn't even have been drivable. Then I saw the back seat. There were frost-covered handprints on the inside of the rear window, 5 of them, small, child-sized, pressed tightly to the glass, as though someone had been trying to get out. I shined my flashlight inside. Empty. But the handprints remained, slowly melting into watery streaks. I turned around, suddenly aware of how isolated I was. The snow had thickened. The road was nearly invisible behind me. I got back into my truck, locked the doors, and sat in silence, trying to calm down. And then I heard it. A faint knock from the back seat of my truck. I froze. There was no one there when I got in. I would have seen them. I turned slowly, heart pounding, flashlight trembling in my hand. Nothing, just frost, forming in the shape of another small handprint on the inside of the rear window. I started the engine and sped off, tires slipping in the snow. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest gas station an hour away. The woman's body was eventually recovered. The car was taken for inspection. But the weirdest part came later, when investigators ran the license plate. The vehicle had been reported missing in 2003. The woman behind the wheel had been declared dead that same winter, found frozen in her car during a blizzard. Same road, same mile marker, same exact description. They said I must have come across an old accident, that somehow I'd mistaken the details. But I know what I saw. And ever since that night, I sometimes find small, icy handprints on my truck windows, even when there's no snow, even when I haven't driven it in days. The snowstorm had already trapped us for 2 days when the knocking began. I was visiting my older brother Liam in his remote mountain cabin, a secluded place buried deep in the Rockies, where he'd been living off the grid for almost a year. He'd invited me for a short winter break, promising silence, fresh air, and a break from city life. I hadn't expected to get caught in one of the worst snowstorms in a decade. By the second day, the road was completely impassable. The power was out. The generator had started sputtering. The radio gave nothing but static. No cell signal, just white, endless cold. We still had firewood and canned food, but something about the air had shifted. Like the cold itself had grown heavier, watching us, listening. Liam seemed unaffected. He was always calm, always detached. But I started hearing things, scraping sounds from the roof, whispers outside the windows, footsteps crunching just beyond the edge of visibility. The first knock came just after midnight, 3 sharp taps at the front door, quick, deliberate. We both sat up in our separate rooms. I heard Liam walk into the living room. "You hear that?" I called. He didn't answer. I got up and found him standing at the front door, peering through the frosted window. No one there. I opened the door. Snow drifted in. The porch was empty, but something was off. There were tracks in the snow, Bare feet, small, narrow, almost childlike, except they had too many toes. 6, maybe 7, and they didn't go anywhere. No approach path, no retreat, just prints in a perfect half circle, like someone had appeared, stood there, and vanished. We didn't sleep much after that. By the third night, the knocking came from every side of the cabin. Walls, windows, doors, always in sets of 3. Always fast, sharp, and mocking. Liam became restless. He started pacing, muttering things under his breath, drawing strange symbols on paper and burning them in the fireplace. I asked him what he was doing. "They're a warding sigil," he said flatly. "They might keep it out." Keep what out? He wouldn't tell me. I started seeing things then. Faces in the frost on the windows, hollow-eyed, featureless shapes pressed against the glass, shadows standing motionless at the tree line, arms too long, heads tilted as if curious. One night I found Liam staring into the fire, whispering a name over and over. Thalith. I asked him what it meant. He finally looked at me, his face pale and eyes hollow. "It followed me here, from the mountain. I thought the snow would bury it, but it just waits." That night, I dreamed of a figure in the tall, emaciated shape with antlers of black ice, a stitched face sewn into a permanent smile. It stood beside the cabin, watching me sleep through the wall. When I woke up, my bedroom window was open, even though I hadn't touched it. Snow had blown inside, and on the floor, right beneath the sill, were fresh footprints, not mine. I told Liam we had to leave, storm or not. He didn't respond. He just stared at the fireplace again, rocking slowly, holding a piece of bone carved with runes. That was the last night I saw him alive. I woke up to a horrible sound, splintering wood, a scream, and then silence. I ran into the living room and found the front door torn from its hinges, snow pouring inside. Liam was gone. No sign of struggle, no blood, just a single trail of deep, inhuman footprints leading away into the woods. I chased them. I don't know how long I ran. Hours, maybe. I found nothing. No body. No sign of him. Only one thing remained. In the middle of a small clearing, surrounded by untouched snow, I saw a wooden totem, a twisted effigy made of branches, cloth, and bone. It had my brother's face nailed to it, not a mask. His actual face, peeled clean, stretched across wood, lips still frozen in a silent scream. I fell to my knees, screaming, but there was no sound in that. The snow absorbed everything. I was drowning in silence. When I returned to the cabin, the storm had passed. Authorities said Liam must have gotten lost in the snow. His body was never found. They didn't believe my story. They said I hallucinated from isolation. That trauma made me see things, but I know what I saw. And sometimes, when it snows heavy and the wind howls just right, I still hear it. 3 sharp knocks on my window, and a whisper behind my ear. "Thalith." I hadn't planned on staying the night. My job was simple. Inspect utility lines after major storms, log any damage, report back. Most of the time, it was routine. Drive out to remote sectors, take a few photos, maybe climb a pole or two, then head back before dark. But during that blizzard in late January, I got stuck further out than I should have. My truck got lodged in a snowdrift around dusk, miles from the nearest road. With no signal and no way to radio out, I had no choice but to hike to the nearest structure, marked on my map. A small maintenance cabin deep in Sector 9. I'd only heard about the Sector 9 cabin in passing. Most guys joked about it like it was cursed. One of those places with stories whispered on lunch break. People said it was abandoned years ago. No one ever explained why. Just that it was off. I always assumed they were just trying to mess with the new hires. By the time I reached it, night had already fallen. The cabin stood crooked in the snow, warped by time and storms, its roof heavy with ice, its windows frosted shut. Still, it beat freezing to death in the woods. Inside, it was colder than I expected. Bone-deep cold, like the air hadn't moved in years. The floor creaked beneath every step. The furniture was sparse, just a dusty cot, a broken desk, and an old kerosene lantern that surprisingly still worked. I lit the lantern and sat near the window, watching the snow come down like a curtain of white noise. That's when I noticed the journal on the desk. It looked old. Leather-bound, pages curled with age, brittle and yellow. I opened it. The first few entries were technical reports, boring notes about wiring, weather conditions, generator performance. Then, things shifted. Midway through, the entries became erratic. Scribbled words, unfinished sentences, panic in the handwriting. One page just read, "Do not look out the window after midnight." Another said, "It copies, it watches, it waits for you to notice it." And then this one, "If you see your reflection move first, it's already inside." I tried to laugh it off. Just some old prank, maybe a technician losing their mind from isolation. But the deeper I read, the worse it got. There were dozens of drawings, twisted, angular creatures with blank faces and elongated limbs. Some crouched at the edge of beds, others hovered just outside the windows. One drawing showed a man staring into a mirror, while a second version of himself crawled through the reflection behind him, and beneath it, a single word, Watcher. I slammed the journal shut. The lantern flickered. Something moved across the window. I jumped to my feet and peered out, but there was nothing, just wind and snow. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there, watching me. I locked the door, shoved a chair under the handle, and lay down on the cot with my coat still on. I must have dozed off, because when I woke up, it was pitch black. The lantern had, and then I heard it. 3 slow knocks on. I stayed frozen, barely. Maybe it was a branch, just a branch. Another knock, louder, firmer. I turned toward this and froze. My reflection was staring at me, but I wasn't near. I hadn't moved, and yet there I was, my face staring back, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. Then it smiled. I didn't. I couldn't. I was still paralyzed. It raised its hand and knocked again. I bolted from the cot, stumbled across the room, and knocked over the lantern. Glass shattered. The door flew open with a gust of icy wind, but I didn't run, because when I looked toward the door, it was standing there. Not me, a reflection. Something else. Wearing my face like a poorly stretched mask. Skin too tight, mouth a little too wide, eyes completely wrong. Cold, empty, hungry. I don't remember what happened. I must have blacked out. When I woke up, it was morning. The storm had passed. The tracks outside the cabin led in a perfect circle around the building, and then disappeared. Rescue crews eventually found me wandering the highway a day later. I told them I'd gotten lost. I didn't mention the reflection. The journal was gone. The cabin, when they checked, was empty. Just dust and rot. No furniture, no lantern, no journal. But sometimes, when I pass a mirror or glance into a window at night, I swear I see something just behind me, waiting, smiling. I didn't want to believe the stories. People in my town always whispered about that road, the one that cuts through the forest, where the trees grow too close together and the snow never settles quite right. They called it Dead Man's Hollow. It was just superstition, I thought. Just the usual folklore from a small mountain town bored during winter months. So when my boss assigned me to deliver equipment up to a weather station on the other side of the pass, I didn't hesitate, even though it meant driving straight through that stretch of road, deep into the storm. I left late in the day. The snow was already picking up by the time I passed the last sign of civilization. Thick clouds rolled in fast, swallowing what little sunlight was left. The trees closed in on either side of my truck, skeletal and black against the white storm. That's when the radio died. One moment it was playing static-filled news update, and the next, silent. Not even a hum. I fiddled with the dial, but nothing came through. Just the sound of the wind outside and the crunch of tires over snow. Then I saw her, a girl standing on the side of the road, barefoot in the snow. She wore a tattered white dress that fluttered in the wind, even though everything else was still. Her hair hung over her face. I slammed on the brakes, heart pounding. She didn't move, didn't even flinch, just stood there, head bowed, like she was waiting for something. I rolled down the window a little. "Hey, are you okay?" She didn't respond. Something about her posture unsettled me. It wasn't just that she was standing in the middle of a snowstorm. It was the way she stood. Too still, too perfect, like a mannequin posed just right. Then she turned her head, slowly. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and hollow, and her mouth, God, her mouth was sewn shut. I slammed the window up and hit the gas, tearing down the road. I didn't care if I was speeding. I just needed to get away from her. But 10 minutes later, she was there again. Same spot, same posture. Like I'd driven in a circle, except my GPS said I hadn't. The truck hadn't turned around. I'd been going in a straight line. I drove past her again and again and again. Every time I passed her, she looked a little different. The stitches in her mouth were fraying. Her head tilted more. Her skin paled further. On the 5th pass, her eyes were bleeding. I stopped the truck and got out. I don't even know why. I just needed to see if she was real. I walked toward her slowly, boots crunching in the snow. But when I got within 10 feet, she vanished. Not ran, not disappeared behind something, just gone. I turned back toward the truck, and she was sitting in the driver's seat. Her hands gripped the wheel. Her sewn mouth grinned through the blood-soaked stitches. I froze, every nerve in my body screaming. Then the truck's headlights flicked on by themselves. The engine started. The door slammed shut, and she drove away. I chased it through the snow, shouting, stumbling, slipping, until the taillights disappeared around a bend. I was left in the middle of Dead Man's Hollow, with nothing but the wind and the growing cold. I wandered for hours before I found the truck again. It was crashed into a tree, twisted metal, and shattered glass. No footprints, no sign of her. Just a single thing left behind on the driver's seat, a sewing needle and a piece of thread. When the rescue team finally found me 2 days later, I was in shock. I told them I got lost, crashed, and hallucinated from the cold. That's what everyone. But I still see her. Every time I pass a snowy road or look into a fogged window, I see her standing there in the distance, stitched mouth, hollow eyes, waiting. And sometimes at night, I dream of her driving my truck through the snow. Except this time, I'm the one standing on the roadside. I was never one for isolation, but the job paid too well to refuse. The research station was perched on a snowy ridge in the middle of nowhere, 3 hours past the last gas station, accessible only by one winding road that disappeared under snowfall most of the year. I was assigned to maintain the equipment for a 3-week rotation while the rest of the crew was on leave. I didn't mind at first. I figured I'd catch up on some reading, get paid, and enjoy the quiet. But the quiet wasn't peaceful, it was suffocating. The snowstorm came faster than expected on my 4th night there. Whiteout conditions, winds strong enough to rattle the walls, and the temperature plummeting to levels that would kill a man in minutes outside. I was locked in, alone. That's when I started hearing footsteps. At first, I thought it was the wind, but no. These were deliberate, heavy, slow. I'd hear them pacing in the hallway when I was in the lab, or right outside the door when I was trying to sleep. I checked every time. Nothing. No prints in the snow near the door. No signs of forced entry. I tried to rationalize. Old pipes, the station settling, paranoia from the storm. But deep down, I knew better. Then I found the photograph. It was wedged behind a cabinet in the storage room, a faded Polaroid showing a man standing in front of the station's entrance. He looked normal enough, except there was something strange about his shadow. It didn't match his body. It was elongated, twisted, and its hands were clawed. The more I stared at it, the more distorted it looked. I flipped the photo over. One sentence was scrawled on the back in pencil. He walks when the wind howls. That night, the wind howled louder than ever, and the footsteps returned. I locked myself in the lab and tried to distract myself with equipment diagnostics, but I couldn't ignore the sound. The footsteps were closer, slower, measured. I checked the surveillance monitors. Each hallway was empty, but then I noticed one camera flickering, the one outside the generator room. It showed a tall figure standing in the snow. At first, I thought it was just a glitch. The image was grainy, the shape unclear, but then it moved. It took one step forward, then another, and the camera feed went dead. The lights in the station flickered. The generator sputtered. The air felt heavier, colder, like something had slipped inside with the wind. I barricaded myself in the lab for the night. I didn't sleep. Every few minutes, I heard a faint scratching at the door. Not like nails, like something harder, sharper, like bone. By morning, it was gone. But the scratches were still on the door. Deep gouges, 5 of them. I tried calling out on the radio, but the signal was buried in static. When I checked the antenna, I found it twisted, bent like it had been crushed by something impossibly strong. That evening, I found another Polaroid slipped under the lab door. This one showed me, standing by the window, looking out, unaware that behind me, the figure was there, standing in the shadows, watching, but I never posed for that photo. I tore it up and burned the pieces, but it didn't matter. The next morning, there was another. This time, I was asleep in my bunk. The figure stood beside me, leaning close, its hand inches from my face. I lost it. I tried to leave, packed my gear, started the snowmobile, and gunned it toward the road. But the path had disappeared under the snow. I drove in circles, trying to retrace the way I came, but I kept ending up back at the station. It was like the storm had swallowed the world whole. And then the figure was everywhere. I'd see it through windows, reflected in the glass, standing at the end of hallways, motionless. I'd hear it breathing behind me, wet, rasping, like lungs full of ice. I set up every light in the station, kept them on 24/7. I thought if I could keep the place bright, it wouldn't come. But that didn't stop the shadows from moving. On my last night, the power went out. Everything went black. And in that silence, I heard the door creak open. I held my breath, crouched in the corner, holding a wrench like it could protect me. The cold crept in and so did the sound. Footsteps, steady and slow, moving through the station. Then I heard my own voice, calling from the hallway. Software, muffled. Help, please, help me. But I wasn't saying it. It was still in the corner. The voice came closer. Help me. It's so cold. Let me in. When the rescue team arrived a week later, they found me outside, barefoot in the snow, half frozen but alive. I don't remember running. I don't remember getting out. All I remember is the face I saw in the dark, twisted, tall, eyes like frostbitten voids, and a grin that didn't belong on any human face. I quit my job after that, moved to the city, avoid snow at all costs. But sometimes, when the wind howls outside my apartment, I swear I hear those footsteps again. And I keep finding Polaroids under my door, each one a little closer than the last. I used to love snowstorms. Growing up in Maine, they were part of life, blanketing everything in silence, making the world feel softer, calmer, peaceful. So when I inherited my grandfather's cabin near Grey Ridge Lake, I didn't think twice about spending a weekend up there. Even with a snowstorm forecast, I hadn't been to the place since I was a kid. It was tucked deep into the woods, down a winding road barely visible under layers of frost. The cabin hadn't changed. It was still that weathered little thing with antlers nailed over the door and a chimney that coughed black smoke if you didn't warm it up right. The first day was nice. I lit the fireplace, made some coffee, and listened to the snow piling up outside. There was something nostalgic about the way it blanketed the trees, the crunch under my boots when I stepped out to chop firewood. But that night, something changed. It started with the tapping. I was reading by the fire, nearly dozing off, when I heard it. Soft, rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. I thought maybe a tree branch was brushing the window. Nothing unusual. I ignored it at first. But the sound didn't stop. It moved from one window to another. Like someone was circling the cabin, tapping their fingers across each pane. I checked outside with a flashlight. Nothing but snow and darkness. I tried to shake it off as my imagination. But deep down, something felt wrong. I locked the doors, bolted the window, and went to bed. Around 3 a.m., I woke up freezing. The fire had gone out. But that wasn't what startled me. It was the noise. Not tapping anymore. It was scratching. Slow, deliberate. Something scraping along the walls outside. I got up and crept to the window, heart pounding. The snow outside was thick, but the moonlight gave just enough visibility. That's when I saw them. Footprints. Dozens of them. Circling the cabin in a wide ring. Barefoot prints. I stepped back, confused and uneasy. The nearest neighbor was miles away. There's no way anyone would be out here in a storm like this without shoes, without freezing to death. Then I saw something else. A handprint on the window. From the inside. I spun around, shining the flashlight across the room. Empty. Nothing out of place. But the handprint was there, pressed in the condensation. 5 long fingers splayed wide. That was the first night. The second night was worse. The scratching turned into banging. Heavy thuds against the walls, like something was throwing its full weight at the cabin. The windows shook. The door rattled. I gripped the poker from the fireplace and stood in the middle of the room, eyes darting from one dark corner to the next. Then, the whispering began. It came from the fireplace. At first, it was just faint murmurs, like voices far away. Then, they grew louder, distinct. They called my name. Whispers. Dozens of them, all hissing it in unison. Daniel! Daniel! I backed away from the hearth just as the fire flared, bright and violent. The shadows in the corners stretched longer, deeper. One of them moved. It wasn't a trick of the light. A figure stepped out from the corner, pale, barefoot. Its face was wrong, smooth where eyes and a mouth should have been. Just a blank stretch of skin. It tilted its head slowly, like it was studying me. I ran, bolted out into the snow with nothing but my boots and a coat, desperate to make it to the old shed out back. I barricaded myself inside, heart thudding in my ears, breath visible in the freezing air. I stayed there all night, listening, watching through the slats. More of them, figures, faceless and slow, circling the cabin. One stood by the shed for hours, not moving, just standing there, like it was waiting. By morning, they were gone, but the footprints remained. Hundreds now, leading away from the cabin, disappearing into the woods. I left that morning, didn't pack, didn't lock the door, just got in the car and drove through the storm until I reached town. No one believed me, of course they did, but I know what I saw. I've tried to forget, tried to rationalize, but every winter when the snow begins to fall and the wind howls at night, I hear that tapping again, and sometimes, just sometimes, I see footprints outside my apartment, barefoot, human, in the snow. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend, just me, my dog Baxter, and the mountains, a solo trip to clear my head after a stressful few months. I'd rented a remote cabin up in the Rockies, far from everything, no neighbors, no traffic, no signal. That was the appeal. Complete silence, total isolation. The first day was everything I hoped for. Baxter was thrilled to run around in the snow, chasing his own footprints and sniffing every tree stump in sight. I spent the evening by the fire, sipping coffee and watching the snowstorm pick up through the frosted window. But then, night came. Around midnight, Baxter started acting strange. He sat up, stiff as a statue, ears perked toward the front door. His low growl rumbled through the room, a sound I'd never heard from him. I listened too. At first, I didn't hear anything, but then it came. Faint crunching, like footsteps in the snow just beyond the porch. Slow, steady steps circling the cabin. I grabbed the flashlight and opened the door, shining it across the snow. Nothing, not a single track. The wind was picking up, and I told myself, Maybe it had been the trees or an animal. But Baxter didn't settle. He kept staring at the door, whining low under his breath. That's when I noticed the smell. It was faint, something sour and metallic like rusted iron. It drifted in on the wind and made my stomach turn. I tried to sleep, but something was wrong. Around 3 a.m., Baxter jumped onto the bed, trembling. That's when I heard it too. Whispers. Not loud, not even intelligible. Just soft murmurs coming from the walls. I sat up, trying to pinpoint the sound. It wasn't in my head. It was real. And then I heard the door creak open. My heart dropped. I grabbed the flashlight again and ran into the living room. The front door was wide open, snow drifting in across the floor. I know I locked it. I know I did. There were footprints in the snow on the threshold. Barefoot. I followed them with the light. They didn't go to the door. They came from inside the house. I slammed the door shut, locked it again, and pushed a chair up against it. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did Baxter. The next day, I tried to leave. I packed our things, loaded the truck, and turned the ignition. Nothing. Dead battery. I popped the hood, checked everything. It had been fine yesterday. I hiked 3 miles down the road trying to get a signal. Nothing. Just thick forest and falling snow. No signs of anyone, no animals, no birds. Just silence. By the time I got back, the footprints were everywhere. Around the house, in the snow. Different sizes. Some small like a child's, others impossibly large. Baxter refused to go inside. He stayed on the porch, tail tucked, ears flat. That night I heard it again. The whispering. Louder now, inside the walls. And I saw something. There was a mirror in the hallway near the kitchen. I passed by it and saw my reflection, but it wasn't right. I stopped, stared at it. My reflection was smiling. I wasn't. Then it moved. My reflection turned and walked away while I stood frozen in place. I smashed the mirror. Glass scattered across the floor, but the reflection kept going, still visible in the shards, still walking deeper into the house. I tried to convince myself I was hallucinating. Stress, isolation, fear, maybe that's all it was. But then I started seeing them. Figures, pale and thin, lurking just beyond the windows. They didn't move like people. They stood still for hours, watching. When I looked away, they were suddenly closer. One night, I found a message scrawled into the condensation on the window. "Let us in." I didn't write it. The last night was the worst. The cabin went cold, freezing like every bit of heat had been sucked out. The fire wouldn't catch. Baxter hid under the bed, shaking. The whispers turned to screams, hundreds of voices, shrill and overlapping, coming from every direction. Then they came inside. I don't know how. I didn't see a door open or a window break. They were just there, crawling out of the walls, rising from the floorboards, reaching for me with long, twisted arms. I grabbed Baxter and ran. I didn't care about the cold. I didn't care about getting lost in the storm. I just ran into the woods, not looking back. Somehow, I made it to the ranger station the next morning. They found me half frozen, delirious, rambling about voices and faceless people. When they went back to the cabin, it was empty. Nothing broken. No footprints. No signs of entry. But they found something etched into the wall above the fireplace. "Stay with us." I haven't been back since, and I never will. But some nights, I still hear them, just faintly, beneath the wind, whispering from inside the walls. It was supposed to be a routine job, just a 2-day snowplow contract for a small township on the edge of nowhere. I'd done it dozens of times. Drive the plow, clear the roads, keep the highways passable during the storm. I took the job because it paid well, and I figured it'd be easy money. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that this stretch of road hadn't been cleared in years for a reason. They didn't tell me about the missing drivers, or the stories. I arrived early in the morning, right before the storm hit. The snow had already started falling, thick and heavy. I met the township supervisor, a quiet old man named Ellis, who handed me a map with a specific route circled in red. "Stick to this path," he said. "Don't veer off. Don't stop for anything." I laughed, assuming it was just some weird small-town superstition. He didn't laugh back. The storm worsened quickly, visibility dropping to near zero. I climbed into the plow and started my route. The road twisted and curved through dense, frost-bitten woods. There were no houses, no lights, nothing but white trees, and the howl of wind scraping against the windshield. About an hour in, I saw something in the road, a figure. At first, I thought it was a deer, or maybe someone lost in the snow. I slowed the plow and squinted through the windshield. It was a woman, pale, barefoot, wearing what looked like a hospital gown. Her arms hung limp at her sides, and her head tilted unnaturally, like her neck had given out. Her eyes were fixed on me, dark, hollow eyes, with no light behind them. I hit the horn. She didn't flinch. I couldn't just leave her. So I opened the door, stepped down into the snow, and walked toward her. "Hey," I called out. "You okay? Are you hurt?" No response. As I got closer, I noticed something even more disturbing. She wasn't standing on the snow. She was just above it, hovering inches from the ground, her bare feet unmoving. I stopped in my tracks, heart pounding. My breath clouded in the air in front of me. The snow around her was untouched. No footprints, no trail. Then she opened her mouth. No sound came out, just a slow, unending gape, wider and wider, until her jaw unhinged in a way no human mouth should. Her eyes rolled back, and I stumbled backward toward the plow, slipping in the snow. By the time I got back in and slammed the door shut, she was gone. Just vanished. I convinced myself it was stress, fatigue, a trick of the snow. But then it happened again. Further down the route, I saw another figure, a man this time, hunched over in the middle of the road. When I stopped, he looked up, face twisted, skin blistered and pale. He screamed, this time loud and clear, and I swear I felt it vibrate through the plow, like it was coming from inside me. I didn't get out again. I floored it and kept driving, the plow blade scraping the road violently. That's when the radio crackled. I hadn't touched it, hadn't even turned it on. But it came alive with static. Then a voice, distorted and wrong. You shouldn't be here. I yanked the plug from the socket. The voice kept going. They don't like it when you come too close. Suddenly the road was gone. I was plowing through thick snow in a place that wasn't even on the map. Dense woods pressing in on both sides, branches scraping the sides of the plow like claws. It was as if the route I'd followed had vanished behind me. I tried turning around, but every path led deeper into the forest. No matter which way I drove, the trees closed in and the storm grew worse. Then I started seeing them, dozens of pale figures standing just at the edge of the woods, some tall, some crawling, some with broken, unnatural movement, watching, always watching. The windshield frosted over from the inside, and when I wiped it clear, I saw a message scrawled into the condensation. We never left. I don't remember crashing. All I remember is waking up in the snow, outside the plow. The machine was torn apart, like something had ripped through it, deep gashes in the metal, the inside soaked with something dark. No footprints, no tracks. Nothing around me but snow and silence. Somehow I made it back to the township office on foot, half frozen, delirious. Ellis looked at me like he already knew what I'd seen. We told you not to veer off, he said quietly. I didn't ask questions, just left. But I still have nightmares about that road, about those faces in the woods and the voice in the radio that wasn't coming from anywhere human. And sometimes, when I drive at night and the snow starts falling again, I hear that whisper on the you're still on the route. It was my first winter living alone in my late grandfather's cabin, deep in the mountains of Montana. I'd inherited it after his passing and decided to spend a few months away from city noise, seeking peace, maybe even a little solitude. I didn't know that solitude could become something suffocating, something haunting. The cabin was isolated, a 2-hour drive from the nearest town, and surrounded by miles of snow-covered forest. It had a rustic charm, wooden walls, creaky floorboards, and a fireplace that always seemed to whisper when the flames danced. My grandfather had spent the last 20 years of his life here, and though my family never visited much, the place felt oddly comforting until the snowstorm hit. The forecast had warned of a blizzard, but I underestimated. By the second night, I was completely snowed in. The wind howled like a wounded animal, and snow slammed against the windows so fiercely, I thought the glass would shatter. I lit every oil lamp I had and threw extra logs into the fireplace, but no amount of warmth could shake the growing feeling of dread in my chest. It started with the footprints. On the third morning, I woke up to find tracks in the snow. Bare footprints leading from the woods straight up to my porch steps. Human footprints, bare. No shoes, no coat, no trail going back, just toward the cabin. But there was nothing else. No knock, no sign anyone had been at the door. I opened the door hesitantly, half expecting to find someone collapsed in the snow. But the tracks stopped right at the front door. Just stopped. I stared at them for a while, heart racing. The temperature outside was brutal. No one could survive barefoot at cold. Not for long. That night, I heard something scratching at the back window. I didn't have the courage to check. I locked every door, every window, and sat in the center of the living room with a fire poker clutched in my hand. The scratching went on for hours. Slow, deliberate scraping like fingernails on glass. But when morning came, there was nothing. No marks, no damage. Just a sick feeling in my stomach and the overwhelming sense I was being watched. It escalated fast after that. The next night, I heard footsteps upstairs. Heavy, dragging steps. The attic was sealed. I hadn't even opened it since arriving. I grabbed the poker again and forced myself to climb the stairs. Every creak of wood echoed louder than the last, like the house was holding its breath. I reached the attic door and paused. Something was breathing behind it. Low, raspy, slow. When I finally pushed it open, there was nothing inside, just darkness and dust. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something in the far corner, a small pile of melted snow and a single wet footprint on the wooden floor. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even blink. By the fourth day, I was unraveling. The storm hadn't let up, and I was stuck alone with whatever was in that house. I tried to convince myself it was stress, cabin fever, maybe even a hallucination. But then I found the journal, tucked beneath the floorboards in my grandfather's bedroom, hidden in an old metal box. The first few pages were normal, notes about hunting, weather patterns, repairs on the roof. But further in, the entries turned strange. It came again last night, scratching at the windows, whispering through the walls. It wears a face, sometimes mine, sometimes hers. It doesn't want the house. It wants me to leave. The final entry chilled me to the bone. I tried to burn it. I thought fire would drive it out, but it only laughs now. I can hear it in the fireplace. That's when I noticed the smell. Burnt hair, damp earth, something foul wafting the chimney. That night, the fireplace roared on its own. I hadn't even lit it. The flames danced violently, casting long, unnatural shadows that twisted along the walls. In the flickering light, I saw a shape crouched in the corner, something tall and contorted, watching me with a face that flickered in and out of existence. It had my eyes. It mimicked my movement, jerky and broken, like a puppet learning how to be human. I screamed and ran outside barefoot into the snow, stumbling, sobbing, desperate for distance from that thing wearing my face. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually I passed out in the snow. When I came to, I was in a ranger's cabin miles away. A patrol had found me, frostbitten and hysterical. I told them everything, and of course, they chalked it up to isolation-induced hallucination. But when they returned to my grandfather's cabin, they found it burned to the ground. The fireplace had exploded during the storm, they said. But I know better. I saw the thing rise from those flames. Even now, sometimes when I light a fire, I hear it again, scratching in the chimney, whispering with my voice. And every now and then, I wake up to wet footprints leading from my bedroom door, straight to the fireplace. It was supposed to be a quiet winter weekend at the cabin, a little break from the constant noise of city life. My girlfriend, Mira, had planned it weeks in advance, convinced that sometime in the snow-covered woods would do us both good. And I'll admit, the place was beautiful when we first arrived. Tall pine trees blanketed in white, a frozen lake shimmering in the distance, and a small wooden cabin nestled beneath a ridge. The first day was peaceful. We lit a fire, cooked a simple meal, and drank wine while watching the snowfall outside. The wind was gentle, the night was calm, and for once, everything felt still. We laughed, talked, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to contentment. Then came the storm. It arrived so quickly that it felt unnatural, like it had been waiting for nightfall. One moment we were watching the trees sway softly, and the next, a wall of snow and wind swallowed everything outside. The windows rattled, the fireplace hissed and cracked unnaturally. The sky turned a suffocating shade of gray. We weren't too worried at first. We had supplies, enough firewood, and no plans to leave early. But something changed that second night. Something inside the cabin felt wrong. It started with the door. We heard it creak open just after midnight. Mira thought it was the wind, but when I checked, the door was fully ajar, wide open, like someone had walked in. Snow had begun to collect on the threshold, but there were no tracks outside. Nothing leading in, no animal prints, nothing. I shut it quickly, locking it, bolting it, and placing a heavy wooden chair under the handle just in case. I barely slept. The wind screamed all night long, but beneath that howling I swore I heard something else. Whispers, words, low, rhythmic chanting, coming from behind the walls, beneath the floorboards. I told myself it was just the wind funneling through cracks, but even Mira began to glance nervously around the room by morning. The next day, we found the writing. It was carved into the wood just above the fireplace. Words neither of us had noticed. Faint, but freshly scratched. It walks in white. Mira tried to brush it off as some old local superstition. Maybe something my grandfather, who once owned the cabin, had carved in his youth. But it wasn't there the day before. I was certain I would have noticed it. That night, the storm intensified. Snow piled high against the windows, and the cabin groaned under the weight of ice forming on the roof. We were stuck. But it wasn't just the storm we were trapped with. Around midnight, I saw it. There was a figure standing in the tree line, just barely visible beyond the snow-covered porch. A tall shape draped in white, almost blending into the storm itself. No face, no features, just a blur of movement and stillness. I blinked, and it was gone. But the fear stayed, thick, cold, pressing down on my lungs. When I told Mira, she went pale. She'd seen it too. The same figure, the same impossible presence. That's when she told me the truth. A few years ago, her cousin had gone missing during a winter hike, vanished without a trace. No body, no belongings, not even footprints. Just a tent left open, with a message scratched into the frozen ground. It walks in white. I stared at her, heart racing, remembering the carving above the fireplace. We tried to leave the next morning, tried to push our way through the snow, but it was useless. The storm had buried the car, blocked the path, turned everything around us into a white, endless maze. That night, the whispers returned. Only this time, they weren't coming from the walls. They were inside the cabin. Mira was in the kitchen when she screamed. I ran in and found every window and mirror in the cabin covered in frost. Not just random frost, but faces pressed against the glass from the inside, smiling, watching. Hundreds of mouths agape in silent laughter. One of them looked like Mira's cousin. We barricaded ourselves in the bedroom, blocking the door with anything we could move. But the whispers kept growing louder. The lights flickered, shadows moved independently, and the fire began to hiss again. Then, from the hallway, we heard footsteps, soft at first, then dragging, slow, deliberate. The knob turned. We held our breath as something began to push against the door, gently, almost politely, like it wasn't in a hurry. I clutched a lamp, Mira held a fire poker, but nothing came through. Nothing forced its way in. Instead, the sound stopped. A few minutes later, we found the message carved into the door. You've been seen. Neither of us slept. By morning, the storm had finally eased. We packed our things in silence, desperate to leave, barely daring to glance out the windows. But just before we opened the front door, Mira froze. There, right on the porch, was a single white glove, frozen, delicate, perfectly placed. We didn't speak during the drive back to town. We didn't talk about the whispers, the faces, or the figure in white. But that night, as I unpacked, I found something in my coat pocket, a tiny scrap of ice with a word etched into it. Return. I don't know what it is that stalks those mountains in the snow, but I know this. It doesn't just want to be seen, it wants to be remembered. It's been nearly a decade since I last saw my brother. Officially, he's listed as a missing person, vanished during a sudden snowstorm while hiking alone in the northern pines. But I've never believed he was simply lost. Not after what I found. Not after what I've seen. Back then, I was only 16. My brother Adrian was 22. Smart, adventurous, and a little reckless. He'd been obsessed with the northern pines ever since he read about a string of disappearances that spanned decades. Whole groups of hikers, snowmobilers, even experienced rangers, just gone. No bodies, no evidence, no explanation. He used to joke that there was something up there, watching, waiting. We all dismissed it as part of his conspiracy theory. He left in January, right after a fresh snowfall. He said he was going to document the area for a podcast project, something about missing people and folklore. He promised to check in daily. The first 2 days, everything seemed fine. Then, silence. Rescue teams combed the area for weeks. They found his tent, half buried in snow, a cracked camera lens nearby, and something else. His phone, which had somehow survived the weather. But it was locked, and when the police tried to retrieve data, everything was corrupted. Every file, except for one photo. I wasn't supposed to see it, but my mom had a copy, printed and shoved in a folder with the rest of Adrian's case files. It was grainy, unfocused, but it made my blood turn to ice. In the photo, Adrian is taking a selfie. He's smiling, bundled in a parka, a snowy forest in the background. But there's something behind him, something partially obscured in the trees. A figure, pale and tall, completely shrouded in white, its face elongated and featureless. It wasn't human. It couldn't be. I've stared at that picture for years, hoping there was a logical explanation. There isn't. I tried to move on, went to college, got a job. But Adrian's disappearance hung over me like a storm cloud. Then last winter, something happened that shattered the fragile peace I'd built. I received a letter. No return address, just my name in shaky handwriting. Inside was a Polaroid, fresh, undamaged. It showed the entrance to a small hunting cabin I'd never seen before. Snow piled high around it. Scribbled on the back was a message. He's still here. I don't know what possessed me to go. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe I thought I could finally get closure. Either way, I packed my gear, rented a truck, and drove into the mountain. By the time I reached the area, the storm had already begun. Heavy snow, poor visibility, just like the day Adrian vanished. I followed old trails, then unmarked paths, guided only by the vague terrain in the photo. It took me 2 days to find the cabin. It was exactly like the picture. Old, weathered wood, a rusted metal chimney, a heavy door hanging crooked on its hinges. I hesitated before going inside, but the wind was getting brutal, and I knew I couldn't turn back. The cabin was empty, dusty, cold, but something about it felt occupied. There were footprints inside, old but unmistakably human. There was a fireplace, unlit, and a table with a strange carving etched into it, a spiral drawn over and over again in the wood, as if someone had scratched it mindlessly for hours. In the corner, there was a makeshift bed. On it, a torn parka. Adrian's parka. I froze, my fingers traced the fabric, still faintly smelling like his cologne. Then I saw the notebook. Water damaged, pages curled, but legible. It was his handwriting. The entries started normal. Notes about the hike, weather updates, odd sounds in the distance. Then things got darker. I see it now. It doesn't leave tracks. It follows at dusk. It whispers from the trees. I tried to run, but the forest keeps changing. I walk in circles, always back to the same place. It watches me sleep. Sometimes I wake up and my fire's out, even though I never let it die. The last entry chilled me to my bones. It wants me to stay. It doesn't need to kill. It just waits until you forget how to leave. That night I made a fire and stayed in the cabin, unsure of what to do. I kept rereading the journal, hoping for a clue, a direction, anything. I must have drifted off at some point, because I woke to the sound of footsteps crunching outside. I thought it was an animal, but then the door creaked open. There was no wind that could have done that. I reached for my flashlight and swept it across the room, and I saw it, a figure standing in the doorway, same as the photo, tall, white, silent. Its face was blank, but somehow I knew it was watching me, studying me, deciding. I ran. I didn't stop to grab anything but the notebook. I sprinted through the snow blindly, crashing into trees, tripping over roots buried in frost. I don't know how long I ran before I finally reached the road and flagged down a passing snowplow. No one believed me, of course. They blamed exhaustion, hallucinations, trauma. But I know what I saw. I know what lives in them. I still have the notebook. I keep it locked away, but sometimes I hear whispers when I open it. Not words, just faint sounds, like wind through dead branches. Sometimes I think I should go back. That maybe Adrian is still out there, trapped in that spiral of snow and time. But I'm afraid that if I do, I won't return. Because whatever it is, it doesn't kill you. It consumes you, and it waits patiently until you forget that you were ever trying to leave. It was supposed to be a peaceful winter retreat. After a grueling year working double shifts and barely keeping my sanity together, I'd finally taken some time off and booked a small log cabin deep in the woods of a remote mountain town. The online listing showed a cozy place with a fireplace, thick snow-covered pines all around, and not a single neighbor in sight. It was exactly what I needed: silence, solitude, and a break from everything. The drive there was long, winding, and slippery. The snow had been coming down hard all day, but I was determined to get to the cabin before nightfall. As I climbed higher into the mountains, the reception on my phone disappeared, and the world felt like it had been swallowed by white. Just me and the road ahead. I arrived just before dusk. The cabin was smaller than I expected, but it had charm. Rustic walls, a creaky wooden floor, a fireplace already prepped with kindling, and a narrow loft above the main room with a single bed. It was quiet, almost too quiet, but I chalked it up to the snow muffling every sound. The first night was uneventful, just me wrapped in blankets, sipping coffee by the fire. I listened to the wind whistling through the trees and tried to forget the world outside. But the peace didn't last long. It began with the tapping. At first, I thought it was the wind brushing branches against the windows, but the rhythm was too intentional. 2 short taps, a pause, then one slow drag, like nails across glass. I checked outside, found nothing, and tried to convince myself it was the trees, but something about it felt wrong, like it was trying to mimic a natural sound but failing. The next morning, I noticed something strange in the snow just outside the cabin. Footprints. Bare, human-like footprints. No shoes, no boots. Just bare, pale feet in the freezing snow, leading from the woods right up to my front door. And then they stopped. No return path, no signs of anyone else. Just a trail that ended right at my doorstep. I told myself maybe it was a prank, maybe a local messing with tourists. I tried to shake it off, but the air felt different after that. Heavier, colder, like something unseen was watching me through the trees. That night, the tapping came back, louder, closer. I sat by the fireplace, frozen in place, listening to it echo from all around the cabin. I checked every window, every door, nothing, but I felt it, like eyes pressing against the glass. I tried to sleep in the loft, telling myself I was imagining, but then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate creaking on the wooden floor below me. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Something was in the cabin. I waited in silence, heart pounding, until the sound faded. In the morning, I searched the place from top to bottom. Nothing was missing, nothing broken, but I found something chilling near the fireplace. A drawing. It had been carved into the wood by the hearth. A crude stick figure. No face, no features, standing in front of a cabin. My cabin. And behind it, a taller figure. Much taller. Arms that dragged along the ground. A head bent at an unnatural angle. I left that day. I didn't even pack. I just grabbed my keys and ran. But as I reached my car, I saw something else etched into the frost on the windshield. 3 vertical lines, and below them, a single word scratched into the glass. Stay. I didn't. I drove through that storm like a man possessed, not daring to look in the rearview mirror even once. I made it home shaking, numb, but alive. Weeks later, I called the rental company to report what happened, but they told me something that still sends a chill down my spine. The cabin I stayed in hadn't been listed for over 2 years. The owner had disappeared during a snowstorm, and the property had been taken off the market. They said there was no record of no payment, no trace of any booking, nothing. Just an empty cabin waiting for the next visitor to come and stay. It was my first winter working as a snowplow driver in a small, secluded mountain town. I'd moved there to get away from city life, chasing peace and solitude. Maybe a little too much solitude, soon learned. The locals were friendly enough, but they were private, guarded. They had this way of avoiding certain topics, especially when I asked about the road near the old quarry. Every time I mentioned it, they'd glance at each other and quickly change the subject. At first, I thought nothing of it. People have their superstitions, especially in remote places, but I was about to find out that some warnings shouldn't be dismissed. One late night during a particularly brutal snowstorm, I was dispatched to clear Route 11. Yes, the one that ran past the quarry. I was tired but didn't question it. The snow was piling up fast, and the route had to be cleared in case of emergency. The road was pitch black, flanked by thick trees bowing under the weight of snow. My headlights lit only a few feet ahead, and the wipers struggled to keep my windshield clear. I hadn't seen another car in hours. It was just me and the storm. Then, I saw it. A figure in the road. I slammed the brakes and skidded to a halt. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer. But as I squinted through the swirling snow, I realized it was a woman. She stood barefoot, wearing only a torn, thin nightgown, her arms hanging limply by her sides. Her skin was pale, almost blue from the cold, and her hair clung wet to her face. She didn't move, didn't even flinch when I honked the horn. Something about her felt off, wrong in a way I couldn't explain. I reached for the radio to call it in, but it crackled violently, then went dead. I got out of the truck, yelling over the wind, asking if she needed help, but she didn't respond, just turned around slowly and began walking off the road toward the quarry. I should have left it at that. I should have driven away, but something compelled me to follow. Maybe it was guilt, maybe curiosity, or maybe something else entirely. The snow was deep, but her footsteps left no mark. That should have been my first real warning. I followed her path, or what I thought was her path, into the wood. The deeper I went, the quieter the world became. The wind seemed to vanish, and even the storm's howling was muffled. It was like I'd stepped into another place entirely. That's when I found the house, a crumbling, half-buried structure tucked between the trees. The windows were shattered, the door half hanging from its frame. But there were signs of life, faint candlelight flickering inside. I approached cautiously, heart hammering in my chest. Inside, it was warmer, still decrepit, but the candles burned steadily. The woman was there, standing in front of an old fireplace. But something had changed. Her skin was gray now, eyes sunken, lips stitched shut with coarse black thread. When she turned toward me, her head twitched violently, like a puppet on fraying strings. She didn't speak, but I felt something move behind me. I spun around. There were others, dozens of them, figures, men, women, even children, all standing in the shadows, their eyes hollow, bodies stiff, clothes ancient and rotting, their mouths stitched like hers. They watched me, unmoving like statues caught mid-step. Then I heard it, a voice deep and gurgling, not from the room, but inside my head. Join us. I ran. I didn't look back. I don't even remember the path I took, just the cold biting at my skin and the feeling of being chased, though I never saw anything behind me. I made it back to my plow somehow. The door was wide open, snow filling the seat. The engine was off, though I'd never turned it off. I jumped in and drove, not stopping until I was back in town. I tried to report what happened, but my supervisor looked at me with a strange expression, half pity, half fear. He told me quietly that I wasn't the first to see her, that she'd been appearing for decades, always during snowstorms near the quarry. The story changes, but it always ends the same. Someone sees her, follows her, and not everyone comes back. Some believe she was a woman who froze to death, cursed to relive her final moment. Others think it's something far older, something that wears her face to lure people into the forest, into whatever that place really is. I quit the job a week later. I couldn't drive those roads again, not after what I saw. But sometimes, when the snow starts falling hard and the wind picks up, I still hear a soft knock at my door and a whisper in the dark, "Join us." The storm had rolled in faster than expected. I'd been visiting my grandfather's old cabin for the weekend, planning to clean it out and maybe spend a night or two in the place before selling it. It had been abandoned for years since he passed, but I remembered it fondly from childhood. A warm, quiet escape tucked deep in the forest, surrounded by snow-laden pine trees, and the faint smell of firewood. Nostalgia is a strange thing. It can trick you into forgetting how silence can sometimes feel too heavy, how shadows stretch longer than they should. The first night was calm, cold, but manageable. I lit the fireplace, unpacked a few supplies, and explored the cabin. Everything was just how I remembered it. His old rocking chair in the corner, a faded photo of my grandmother on the mantel, even the little trinkets he kept on the shelves. But as night fell, I started to notice little things that didn't feel quite right. It began with the wind. It didn't howl like a regular winter gust. It whispered. At first, I thought it was the creaking wood or snow sliding off the roof, but it was too rhythmic, too deliberate. It sounded like voices, faint and distant, murmuring through the walls. I pressed my ear to the window, trying to convince myself it was just the wind passing through the trees. But then I heard it clearly, a voice right behind me. I spun around, heart racing, but there was nothing there, just the flickering fire casting dancing shadows along the wooden walls. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear footsteps crunching softly in the snow outside, slow, heavy, circling the cabin. The next morning, I found something strange beneath the porch, a trail of footprints leading toward the back of the cabin. Not boot prints, bare feet. The toes were long, thin, twisted in a way that looked inhuman. They disappeared behind the tree line, vanishing into the snow-covered woods. I thought about leaving then, but the storm had worsened overnight. The road back was buried beneath feet of snow, and the power had gone out sometime before dawn. No cell service, no radio, just me in the woods. That evening, I decided to light the fireplace again to keep warm. As I tossed in some logs from the old woodpile, I found something buried beneath the bottom layer, an old wooden box I didn't remember from before. It was carved with strange symbols, crude and jagged, and when I opened it, I nearly dropped it in horror. Inside were small dolls, handmade, bound in twine, and coated in dried, dark stains. One was wrapped in what looked like human hair. Another had a tooth embedded in its chest. But the worst was a tiny figure with pins in its face, its eyes made from tiny bone fragments. I slammed the box shut and threw it outside into the snow. I didn't want any part of whatever that was, but I think that's what started it. That night, everything changed. The wind no longer whispered. It screamed. The trees groaned like something massive was moving through them. And then came the knocking. Not on the door, but the windows. All of them. Soft, synchronized knocks, like dozens of hands tapping in unison from the outside. I sat by the fire, clutching an old hunting knife I'd found in the shed, trying to convince myself this was all in my head. But then I saw them. Figure. Tall, misshapen silhouettes, just beyond the tree line. Dozens. They didn't move like people. They jerked, twitched, flickered between trees like stuttering shadows. Their limbs too long, necks twisted at impossible angles, heads cocked unnaturally to the side. One by one, they began stepping forward, slowly, methodically, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. I barricaded the doors and windows, heart pounding, breath clouding in the freezing air. I didn't know what they were or what they wanted, but I knew they were coming closer. I could hear them whispering, this time in a language I couldn't understand. Low, guttural syllables that rattled the glass and made my skin crawl. Then, the fire died, just like that, snuffed out without warning. The room plunged into darkness. I backed into the corner, knife raised, waiting for whatever was about to happen. But nothing came. No crash through the windows, no splintering door, just silence. Hours passed, I didn't move, and then dawn. When the sun rose, the whispers stopped. The figures were gone. I opened the door slowly, expecting to see blood or destruction, but there was nothing. No tracks, no signs of anyone, not even the box I'd thrown out. It had vanished completely. I left as soon as I could dig out the road. I never went back, but sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I still hear them whispering. I still see those long, crooked silhouettes watching from the edge of the trees, and I keep wondering what would have happened if I hadn't burned that box, or worse, what if I'd kept it?